Welcome back into the Top Buffs Countdown for the basketball team set to tip off the 2021-2022 season on November 9th. Number 5 is Tristan Da Silva, a second-year Buff. Jake, I not to say that Tad Boyle gets annoyed when he gets asked about Jabari Walker, but it's like he almost goes out of his way every time he gets asked about Jabari Walker to bring up Tristan Deselva, as in this guy has a lot of potential and you guys are sleeping on him. And so he's a guy that Tad's brought up more than anybody this preseason.
You know, when we talk about potential and ceilings, we often look at a guy's body and athleticism and say, what can they add? But oftentimes we don't say, hey, they've already got these hard to teach or unteachable skills like IQ and awareness and these things that really don't come to basketball players, maybe until even they're in the NBA in their late 20s. Tristan Da Silva, and maybe this is due to his Euro education and the way Euro basketball players are taught, which hasn't translated at all to Colorado basketball, except with a handful of guys. But Tristan Da Silva is so aware on the court. Like, he seems to never be in the wrong place. And that in itself is so valuable. I mean, we're not playing 2K here. Like, it's hard to know where you're supposed to be. Like, they don't know the routes like Madden. Like, they don't know everything. Like, they have to map it out in their head and have spatial awareness and all these different things that are really hard that are besides shooting the basketball and dribbling the basketball, things that we don't consider. And those are the things that Tristan Da Silva does really well. And those are called the little things. I think they're big things, to be honest. People say the little things are the big things. I hate that cliche, because if you don't know where to be, you don't know how to space the floor, that's a pretty big thing to me. That's not a little thing. And Da Silva knows how to do these things. And oh yeah, he is consistent. He provides a same calmness, a same level of getting to the rebounds in every single game that he played in last year, which was just a handful of real opportunity. He had to step up when Jabari Walker was hurt, and he did so valiantly. He has already proved in the 2 exhibitions that that was not a misnomer. None of us thought that that was a misnomer. So Da Silva is going to be a valuable player to this team. Now, does he provide the sexiness of a Jabari Walker, or maybe even a Neat Clifford or KJ Simpson off the bench? Absolutely not. But you also have to consider that his brother was just one of the best players in the Pac-12. And that might be within him somewhere. And that might be the growth that he can get to. I don't expect him to be Oscar Da Silva. I expect him to be Tristan Da Silva, which is a different basketball player. But that's not to say that he can't be an extremely good and valuable 4-year player here at the University of Colorado, maybe 5-year player even, if he's doing all these different things, particularly all the things that his head coach adores in a basketball player. You know, Tad Boyle's had his favorites over the years, but you could already say that Tristan Da Silva is in that list of favorites that Tad's had.
Is the biggest question with him just, is Tristan Da Silva going to be aggressive enough?
I think it's not only is he going to be aggressive enough, but can he consistently shoot the ball when there's actually pressure on him? Can he step up and provide enough scoring, provide enough plays that aren't simply just, you know, getting a rebound here or there, getting these box outs, you know, getting your rotations right. It's about getting to that next level of, hey, we need a bucket here. Can Tristan Da Silva do that? I don't know that he's there at this point in his career. I think he's more of a role player, which is fine. You can be a role player. You can be a valuable role player. Look at the career PJ Tucker's carved out. He's been a phenomenal NBA player. But when you need a bucket, Tad Boyle might be a little bit more opportune to put a Neat Clifford in the game, or KJ Simpson in the game, or Luke O'Brien to shoot, rather than Tristan Da Silva at this point in his career. But Tristan, with the lineup that Tad Boyle has with Jabari Walker and Evan Batty and these guys, Tristan is possibly the best rebounder. It's between Jabari and Tristan. Evan's not a great rebounder. He's a situational rebounder, a guy that gets box outs. And one of the guys of Tristan, Jabari, Evan, or Lawson is going to have to step up and get boards and eat boards for this team. And I think it might be Tristan. And if it's Tristan, Tristan's not coming out of that lineup.
The next guy on our countdown might surprise the folks that tuned out once last season ended. If you hadn't been paying attention over the summer and preseason, you might be surprised that Keyshawn Bartholomew is all the way up to number 4 on this countdown. But Jake, he's really improved his game and kind of shown in practice why he was a 4-star guy coming out of high school. He shaved the hair down a little bit, new look, and new confidence from him. And the other thing that really stands out when you go to CU practices is how vocal Keyshawn Bartholomew is. He's really stepped up as a leader, learned a lot from McKinley Wright as kind of his understudy. And I know that he struggled, but Tad Boyle has said that last year he had one of the toughest jobs in the country, having to back up McKinley Wright.
I think one of the most unfortunate things about that Spencer Dinwiddie injury all those years ago was that Dom Collier was not able to learn from Spencer Dinwiddie. And I think that set the Buff program back a couple of years, to be honest. Keyshawn Bartholomew coming in, I was so high on. And he just has not had an opportunity to prove himself on the court, really. He had that chance late in the year in the tournament games in the Pac-12 where he kind of flashed some stuff. And you were thinking, okay, there it is. But he never got more than a couple minutes here or there because McKinley Wright was just so phenomenal. And that's okay. And hopefully he was able to see what McKinley Wright was doing from the bench. Hopefully he was able to see what he was doing in practice and learn from it. The things that concern me with Keyshawn Bartholomew are efficiency issues. He's not the best, in terms of efficiency with shooting. He's pretty solid at taking care of the ball. He's got a good handle. I like the decisions he makes on the basketball court. He's good at getting downhill, similar to McKinley Wright in that vein. But he's also a better natural shooter than McKinley Wright. But again, it's the efficiency, making sure you're taking good shots. Can he get good shots without such a dominant wing or big scorer? McKinley had such a great game that he was able to get Jabari Walker shots. Can Keyshawn Bartholomew get Jabari Walker those same looks? I'm not so sure that he can, at least early on. But these are like nitpicking issues of a guy that's going to captain the CU offense and be one of the most important players on this team, if not the X factor for this team. And how much can he grow? How much can he really take over and being the point guard, captaining the ship on offense, speaking up, telling Evan Batty maybe no sometimes and saying, I want to do it this way. It's Keyshawn's team. You're seeing this right now with the Nuggets and Michael Malone. They've got Nikola Jokic, they've got Michael Porter, they've got Will Barton, they've got all these guys making money in the MVP. But their point guard's Monte Morris. They're run by Monte Morris. The Buffs don't have those star players around Keyshawn Bartholomew, but it's the point guard's team. It's his team.
Staying in the backcourt, the other starting guard is senior Eli Parquet. He was a first-team All Pac-12 Defensive Player last year. Disappointed that he wasn't named the outright Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year. That's what he's going for this year. Jake, you wrote a story about that. He's number 3 on the list, so some fringe casual basketball fans might expect that to mean that he's going to be a big scorer. I don't think that's going to be the case. I don't think you necessarily want that either. You want him to continue to be that efficient guy. I think maybe there are certain circumstances where he steps up a little bit more offensively than he did before. But again, I don't think you really want him going too far outside of what he did last year. I think he would take his performance last year this year, right?
Yeah, he was quite literally the most effective player for his role in college basketball last year, which was 3-and-D. The only guys that were better than him had way higher usage rates. So it would be like a guy like Davion Mitchell. And he was just as good as Davion Mitchell. Granted, he didn't have to do nearly as much as a Davion Mitchell because McKinley Wright existed. No player that was as efficient as Eli Parquet scored as few points as he did. And I was asking Eli about, just his life story and stuff like that. And he, like you said, he was so pissed that he didn't get that Pac-12 depoy. And he already has a spot on his arm for where he's going to tattoo Pac-12 depoy. Like he knows. So this man wants Pac-12 depoy so bad. And I think he could get there. My bigger questions is not of his ability, but can the Buffs be good enough where the Pac-12 writers are going to be watching them and going, Eli Parquet took them from being, an 8 seed to a Pac-12 bye team. No one gives MVPs to the team in last place. Can the Buffs be good enough to where Eli Parquet's depoyness really shows out. And, I disagree with you in saying you don't want more from Eli. I think you do want a little bit more. I think he needs to take some more off dribble shots. I think he needs to put up more shots this year because he's going to need to. Those shots are going to go around. The McKinley Wright usage is not going to all be on Keyshawn Bartholomew and then spread to Evan Batty. It's going to go all around the starting lineup. And one of the things I liked about Eli Parquet that was very underrated is he has a really good ability to create shots and plays late in the shot clock. And I think when their offense, the motion offense or floppy runs out or whatever, the tab oil runs the circle over and over, and it ends up with Eli Parquet's hands, Eli has the ability to make, 2 dribbles, pull up jumper, 2 dribbles, pull up, make a pass. And he does it pretty well. And he is a senior. He needs to do those things. He needs to step his game up another level. And if he does so, not only can he be a Pac-12 depoy, but he should be on the Pac-12 maybe all conference second team if he does those things. Because if you're talking about the best defensive player in the country, and then you add in maybe 9 points a game on efficient shooting, you're talking about, a second team conference player. So that's something the Buffs have that, again, Adam, you're going, hey, no, none of our fans are really going to talk about this because he's not even getting more than 12, 15 points a game. And, maybe his highest scoring output of the year might not even be 20, but that doesn't mean he's not an extremely valuable player. And Eli Parquet is the guy that's going to be shutting down Remy Martin come, CU Event Center against Kansas in December.
It shouldn't be this way, but the more offense that Eli Parquet generates, that's going to help his defensive player of the year candidacy as well. It shouldn't be that way, but the guys that are voting for that aren't watching every game of every team. So the more he stands out on that end of the court, it's going to help you notice him just in general, which, again, it shouldn't be the case, but anything he can do more offensively will help him in terms of that voting. Number 2 is Jabari Walker. Jake, I think this is kind of based on potential here. I don't think it's clear cut that he's number 2 on this list. We saw him struggle in those 2 exhibition games. He fouled out of their second one against Nebraska. That's going to be the biggest issue for him is now he is going to be towards the top of other team scouting report, and they're going to try to get him in foul trouble, and Nebraska was successful doing that this past Sunday.
By the list of how we do it with where players are at now in the Buff countdown, I actually probably would have put Parquet above Walker, but I didn't really want to make waves and, have that argument and, hot take Shapiro back at it again. I wanted the context of why. I think we're talking about Eli Parquet as a possible depoy. That's one of the best players in the conference. You can make a case that Eli Parquet is actually number 1 on this list if we're talking about him as a depoy. Jabari Walker is hella good. So is Evan Batty. Like, they're great. But you're talking about Parquet at another level. Jabari Walker is a guy that has not consistently shown it yet. And what really concerns me is Jabari Walker took a lot of open threes and he hit them last year. And that's great, but it really boosted up his points per game. And I asked Jabari about this last year. I said, Jabari, what are you going to do next year when McKinley's not giving you all these open looks? And he said, I've already thought about it and I'm just enjoying it while I can for now. When you're looking at the Buffs offense, you might be taking Jabari Walker as the number 1 option if you're the other team looking at the scouting report based on last year's numbers. There is going to be good defenders on Jabari Walker. They are going to be tight to him. They think that he can shoot nonstop because he shot over 50% last year, and maybe he really is a great shooter. I don't know, but that sample size was a little too small for me to really judge it yet. But you mentioned another thing, Adam, staying on the court. The Buffs had 4 bigs last year, and those 5 fouls that each can give are so valuable. And then they had Strating, who can give another 5 fouls. Jabari Walker comes off the floor. You got Lawson Lovering, but then you don't have that much big behind him. You got Da Silva, but you're running out of fouls. And that's something that Jabari Walker is going to have to manage, just like Evan Batty struggled with his sophomore season, was that foul issues. Batty's gotten a lot better at it, but Batty's going to run into foul issues here and there still too. So you're looking at a Buff starting front court and their top 2 players as judged by this list on this team that are going to get into foul issues. Now, take all that negativity aside, because you're looking at a phenomenal basketball player and a basketball player that could go in the lottery this year. He could leave college early this year and be a lottery pick. How many times have we talked about that in the Tad Boyle era? How many lottery picks does Tad have? I don't think any, right? Alec Burks was a lottery pick, maybe. I can't think off the top of my head, but you're looking at a case for Jabari Walker to be the highest drafted player of the Tad Boyle era after this season. I'm not sure that happens, but that is one of the ways this season can go. But he needs to get consistency down. He needs to figure out how to play when he is focused on as the main player. And he needs to add some tenacity to his game defensively where he can show some switchability. And I think he needs to show that he has some ball handling ability as well, and he can create his own shots some more. But besides all that, he looks to be and projects to be as a very, very good 3-and-D modern day NBA power forward. Now it's just about fine tuning those skills. And some of the things I worry about, aside from, what I've mentioned with Jabari, is Tad Boyle has historically struggled with figuring out how to get wings offense. Deshaun Schwartz should have probably scored way more points at Colorado. Xavier Johnson probably should have scored more points at Colorado. And those guys get frustrated. I wonder, without a very dominant point guard, how are we going to see this offense as it's run through Jabari Walker and Evan Batty? Because the only players we've seen akin to those, Josh Scott was so dominant in the post that it's not really akin to Evan Batty. And Xavier Johnson and Deshaun Schwartz had point guards running those teams when they were phenomenal. So what can Jabari Walker do without McKinley Wright? I think that's probably the biggest questions, the question the Buffs have this year, because that 3-point shooting ability is not going to be repeated. He's not going to shoot 50% again, but can he shoot 38? Can he shoot 40 even at a higher clip, shooting more? If he does, that's another thing that can take the Buffs to the next level.
And number one, no surprise, is Evan Batty, not just for what he does on the court, but what he does off the court in terms of his leadership. Tad Boyle said a couple years ago that he's the most popular kid on campus, and I don't doubt it. He's going to go off and play professional basketball somewhere next year, but when that ends, he's going to be back in Boulder. He's already told me that he wants to be part of the Buffaloes program in the future. He has aspirations to be a head coach or an athletic director. And if you know Evan, you don't put anything outside of his reach. But for now, he's going into his senior year here as a Buff. And, there's not that number one guy on the list that's an All-American candidate this year. There's a lot of depth on this team, 1 to 9. Even 1 to 11 if you go back to the beginning of this countdown. But Jake, just your thoughts here in terms of Evan Batty. You mentioned that he's had issues with foul trouble in the past. What are your expectations for his last year as a Buff?
Academic All-American, maybe. I mean, he already graduated college. He's in grad school. Tried to get Evan to take my class, and he wouldn't because he's like, I'm in grad school, homie. I can't. Talk about him being the most popular Buff. I have never, in college, sure, but man, that dude's showing up to tailgates. I was at a tailgate for a football game, and Evan Batty's showing up taking shots with people. It was awesome. And, he can do it. He's over 21, and he wants to be, part of the CU culture. He loves the football team just as much as, the fans watching this. He's out there doing the same stuff as you do because he bleeds black and gold. And we've heard this with other guys before. But how many guys do you think really bleed black and gold? It's like Phil Lindsay. We're talking about Phil Lindsay, Evan Batty. Maybe McKinley Wright's in the same boat, Spencer Dinwiddie. We're talking about some elite caliber Buffs bleeding black and gold. And I love those guys. And Evan's just so lovable as a player. Now, getting away from the super relatives and the stuff that's kind of not translatable onto the basketball court, the one thing that I think would prevent him from being a basketball coach, a head basketball coach, is he's not mean enough. He's the nicest person on the planet. And I want to see him get a little meaner on the court. Yeah, he's a really aggressive player. He sometimes, and he can be, someone that's ferocious. But I want to see him get a little mean. I want to see him cut it up. I want to see him throw some elbows. And I just don't think that's Evan Batty's game. Evan, Evan had that amazing moment with Tristan's brother Oscar a few years ago, and I think he's just so nice. But I want to see Evan get mad. I want to see Evan say, these are my rebounds. I want to see Evan say, these are my buckets in the post. And if Evan can be a guy that can be the Buffs' leading scorer or leading rebounder, that's a really valuable thing to the Buffs because we're talking about Evan as number one on this list, but I'm not sure what he's going to lead the Buffs in this year, except for actual leadership. He's a really good player. He's a really, really good player, but I see him more as a top level role player, or like a Robin to Batman, rather than being the main guy. So I really hope Jabari Walker or Keyshawn Bartholomew can step up and really take some of the load off Evan Batty, because my nightmare scenario for this season is, one of those guys doesn't step up and we're all sitting here going, Evan Batty can't lead this team. And also Evan Batty isn't good enough. And why isn't Evan Batty better? And you're saying, Jake, that would never happen. But look what happened Phil Lindsay's senior year. We all saw Phil play phenomenally, but Evan isn't an NBA caliber player like Phil was an NFL caliber player. I just worry that what's around Evan may not be enough to make Evan look great. But if the bar raises and the talent around Colorado, which it should, given what is on that court, rises, Evan might fall to number 3 or 4 on this list by the end of the year. And that would be just about the best damn thing for Evan and for this team. And, you're talking about Evan as being one of, a really solid Pac-12 player and being someone that's a very valuable power forward in this conference. And you're talking about him behind a couple guys after being arguably the second or third best player last year behind Deshaun Schwartz and McKinley Wright, and maybe even Dallas Walton at times. If they can get those guys, if Lawson Lovering can get to any semblance of what Dallas Walton was last year and be by Evan Batty's side, if Jabari Walker is just what he was last year and hopefully he's even better, if Keyshawn Bartholomew can consistently show some of the flashes that he showed last year, you're looking at a really good team around Evan Batty. But I don't think Evan Batty's a guy who can just throw the ball down into the post. I don't think Evan Batty's a guy you can throw the ball to in the perimeter and say, make a play. Like, that's not his game. Now, one of the things we haven't seen with Evan Batty, just because the ball isn't in his hands so much, because McKinley Wright, is Evan Batty is a very good big playmaking big. Now, he's not Nikola Jokic throwing 8 assists a game, but he can be like Arvydas Sabonis throwing 3 or 4. And that's really, really important if he can get 3 or 4 assists out of the post or from the wing or out of the corner or on the fast break, throwing, quick passes. So if Evan Batty can show all around game, maybe 12 points, 2.5, 3 assists and 8 rebounds a game, I think those are good numbers for him, particularly because he's doing a lot of the small things around the court. Now, like you said, staying on the floor, staying out of foul trouble, and actually playing really good post defense. And can he do that against really big Pac-12 players when he's undersized and he doesn't have a bigger center and he's maybe playing the actual 5 role? These are questions going into next year. And you see, as we count down the list, I started to get a little bit more negative. It was all positivity towards the end, but it's because there's expectation. And with expectation comes disappointment in these guys. And I really hope that's not the case with Evan Batty or Jabari Walker, because I truly do think a lot of these players, and they are phenomenal basketball players. Now it's about stepping their game up to the next level. And these are the questions they are asking of themselves right now as they enter the season, which starts very soon.
Down a point, 10 seconds left. Who knows who's going to get the ball? That gives Colorado some flexibility. There's not that go-to guy. It's a new year, a new team. It's going to be a different look out there. A lot of young guys on this team that I think it's going to be one of those seasons where they're going to make you scream and want to throw your remote at the TV one night, but you're going to see the growth out of this group. I think it's going to be, even if they don't make the NCAA tournament, even if, they're a 500 or an NIT team this year, it's still going to be a team that you're going to be able to watch their growth. And that part of the process is going to be fun. Jake, I think that maybe some people are going to have too high of expectations, but don't you think this is going to be generally a fun season, a fun team to watch?
What concerns me a little bit, and Tad Boyle's never wrong, is Tad Boyle said he really likes this team and he says this team is good. He's only been wrong maybe once in his 12 years about the caliber of team he's had. Tad Boyle saying this team is good, that might be an indicator that they're a little bit better than I think they are. Like you, Adam, I think they're maybe an NIT team that's a little bit above 500, that struggles to win some games in the Pac-12 on the road and maybe drops 1 or 2 at home. They have some tough non-conference games. I ultimately see this as a transitional year. I don't see this as the year. I could see Jabari Walker coming back. I could see Jabari Walker going. That obviously will have a big impact on the Buffs' future. But the Buffs' future really is in what can Keyshawn Bartholomew do in terms of development? Can Lawson Lovering turn himself into a starting caliber Pac-12 big this year? Can Nick Clifford turn into a starting caliber wing? Can KJ Simpson jump up to being a starting guy that replaces Eli Parquet, or Javon Ruffin even makes those gains as a redshirt? These are all questions as we kind of await Quincy Allen and some of the guys coming in the next recruiting class. This is a transitional year to me. This is not a tournament team, at least on paper to me, in my mind. I think there needs to be some big gains made by this team in order to make that tournament. Now, if they beat Tennessee and Kansas, we might be changing that discussion. They are home games. In Tad Boyle's mind, they should be winning those games at home. Those are tough games, though, to win at home. But I don't see how they're going to make the tournament, or how people say, oh, they made the tournament last year and they're bringing back, Evan Batty and Jabari Walker. Well, all they're really bringing back are Evan Batty and Jabari Walker in terms of offensive production, and then Eli Parquet in terms of defensive production. Now look down that list. Bartholomew was barely a rotation player last year. Da Silva only played when guys were hurt. And then there's nothing else but garbage minutes and freshmen. So expecting the Buffs to get to exactly where they were last year, I think, is completely an unfair expectation. They lost Deshaun Schwartz, who quite literally was the most efficient player in the transfer market this year, or the transfer portal. Deshaun Schwartz is a phenomenal wing. Dallas Walton was so good in limited minutes for Colorado last year, and those were important minutes, and he did some really big things at times for Colorado. Jariah Horn stretched this floor and was a great shooter, and also collected some big rebounds in games. They lost a lot of things from last year. You just can't pencil them up and say they were in the tournament last year, they're going to be back there this year. That's completely unfair for this team, and it's about how can Evan Batty leave his legacy on this program and transition the next group of guys led by Keyshawn Bartholomew into this next era. This is a perfect opportunity for a transitional year. And I think it's going to be so much fun if you temper your expectations and say, hey, we're going to watch Keyshawn Bartholomew hopefully turn into something special this year. We're going to watch Nick Clifford and Luke O'Brien take those next steps and find out how good of an athlete Julian Hammond really is now that he's at a Pac-12 level, rather than playing at Cherry Creek and absolutely running amok across all sports in Colorado high school. So those are my hopes for this year. These are my expectations. I hate having expectations for these teams, but it was rightful last year to have the expectation to go to the tournament because it was McKinley Wright's senior year, and that's all McKinley Wright wanted. Now this team, I don't think it's okay to say this team's going to the tournament and just pencil it in. And did they get snubbed a little bit by the Pac-12 writers with 7th place in the conference? And, Sports Illustrated said they were 72nd best team in the country today. Maybe a little bit, but that's probably about fair. I'd have them a little bit higher, maybe 6th and like 65th or 6th and, 70, but it's like a marginal amount of difference. I think they're right about where they should be right now. And we're going to see a lot of growing pains with this team, but we're also going to see a lot of fun. And maybe like McKinley Wright's freshman year with Evan Batty, where they upset Arizona and Arizona State, they can do some of those things this year and have some big moments, but they're going to have some tough struggles out on the road in Pac-12 play as well.
All right, Jake, thanks for joining me on the Top Buffs Countdown. Again, November 9th against Montana State is the opener at the CU Events Center. Thanks for tuning in.